Hello, everyone, and welcome to this wonderful new format of studying English grammar. So, what we're going to look at today are going to be adverbials, and we've sort of briefly talked about adverbials, um, but unfortunately, adverbials are the. By the way, in French, you're very familiar with adverbials, and in a sense, one of the reasons that we don't need to spend too much time worrying about them is that I think the French educational system is wonderful as far as studying what you are familiar with as les compléments circonstanciels. I think when you're in college, I think most, I would say, collégiens can tell you with confidence what is un complément circonstanciel de temps, de manière, de but. Uh, so you should really use what you already know. I think you feel fairly confident in identifying them. So so that's really what we're going to study because um, as you're aware, we're really concerned with what we call nominal functions, right? Um, and we've studied nominal functions being things like subject. Typically nominal functions associated with sentence patterns, right, are going to be things like subjects and direct objects and so on. Um, and notice that these nominal functions, when we're talking about sentence patterns, are going to be complements of the verb, right? So let's see for an example of this to make things a little bit clearer. Here, I'm circling a very simple sentence, right? Okay, where we have he drank the milk very slowly, and so let's say we can identify, two noun phrases. We have he being a noun phrase, right? And the milk, which I'm underlining, being a noun phrase. So that's the structure. The structure of he as a personal pronoun is going to be a noun phrase, and the structure of the milk, yes, is going to be a very basic noun phrase that is complement of the verb drank, right? So here we have a case of the transitive pattern, right? Okay, in which we have the subject, the first noun phrase is the subject of the verb drank, and the milk is the direct object of the verb drank, right? And so we have our transitive pattern. But here, once we look at, and so that's when we say that the functions, right, of he and the milk, the two noun phrases, are really sort of determined by the verb drank, right? Um, but what we need to see is that there are other functions. There's another, I would say, major category of a function, which we're going to call adverbial, which is related to the verb, but they're not sort of directly assigned by the verb. If we say that, we can say the direct object is sort of directly assigned by the verb because it's what we call a transitive verb that's going to have a subject and a direct object. That's the kind of a verb that drink is, right? But we can also add other complements to the verb that are kind of extraneous, right? That are not necessary, that we can suppress, right? For example, the sentence "he drank the milk" is a perfectly valid sentence. There's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. But nothing can stop me from adding other information about that event, about drinking. For example, I can say how the person drank the milk. Well, in this case, it's he drank the milk very slowly, right? Okay, so that and you're aware of the fact that this is what you've seen before in your cours de français comme un complément circonstanciel de manière. C'est la manière dont le sujet boit le lait, tout simplement. D'accord. Donc, so the idea is that there is sort of no limit to the amount of adverbials. I could string along, 2 or 3 extra adverbials. I could say he drank the milk very slowly, and we're going to sort of manipulate this sentence. We're going to keep going. I can add another adverbial. I could say, on Wednesday, because he wanted to. So this is, a sentence. He drank the milk very slowly on Wednesday because he wanted to. And hopefully you can sort of appreciate the fact that we could go on and on and on, right? It's in theory, of course, this is only in theory, there's no limit to the amount of adverbials that we can add. And hopefully what I'm saying kind of reminds you of what you were taught in your, cours de grammaire, grammaire française. Lorsqu'on dit, en fait, on dit en français que les compléments circonstanciels ne sont pas des parties essentielles de la phrase. Ils peuvent être supprimés ou aussi déplacés. So, for example, here And the same thing applies in English, right? We have, I can say, well, as we've just seen, I can say he drank the milk. I can say he drank the milk very slowly. I can say he drank the milk very slowly on Wednesday. I can say he drank the milk very slowly on Wednesday because he wanted to. So here we have 1, very slowly, 2, on Wednesday, 3, because he wanted to, 3 adverbials. Okay. So it's important. In a sense, you can think of this being like weeding your sentence, désherber, right? Because sometimes you might be tempted to confuse these adverbials with complements of the verb, right? You might be mistaken and assume that, let's say, because he wanted to was a direct object or an indirect object or a subject complement, right? But that's not the idea. Is that adverbials are not really dependent on the verb in the same way that verb complements are, or I would say traditional verb complements are, such as direct objects, indirect objects, subjects, and so on, right? So that means what we're going to do today is kind of just practice identifying these things in sentences, right? Okay, because there are a lot of them, right? And they're in a sense we sort of ignore them because they are this sort of, in a sense, extra parts of the sentence. But it's perhaps too much of a hierarchical way to look at things, and because of that, if you ignore them, they might sort of destabilize you. They might be the element that doesn't make you feel at home, or that prevents you from really understanding a sentence or writing it as well as you could have. So let's stick with this example. He drank with the milk very slowly on Wednesday because he wanted to. Wednesday is, of course, a capital. It's not like in French. So as I said, we could suppress these, or we can displace them. So I could say on Wednesday, I could put this one here, I could, why not? Oops. Hopefully you can understand what I'm doing. So I can move it and it works. On Wednesday, I would prefer a comma there. It's not that rare. Yeah? On Wednesday, he drank the milk very slowly, comma, because he wanted to. And ta-da, we can move it around and there's no problem. Notice it would be more difficult. There are some constraints. I don't want to get involved with some, but they're mostly stylistic, if you understand what I mean. Like stylistically, this is differently. There might be a sort of different feel and rhythm to the sentence, right? Which might mean that a certain number of speakers are going to prefer using, let's say, one word order to another. But that's sort of a stylistic preference, and it's not a strictly grammatical one. So and it's good to be aware of that. But sometimes it might not seem natural, right? It has a lot to do with these stylistic questions are sort of when you go farther. If you continue to study what people call discourse analysis, right? They're interested in sort of the effects, the sort of the subtle effects very often, or the sort of persuasive effects of putting one element in front of another. But here we're kind of limiting ourselves to the sort of more, I would say, the drier, obviously once again more boring grammatical perspective is just to say, is this legal or not? Is this correct English? Is this going to be perceived as a correct sentence, even though it might not be what most people say? But at any rate, with adverbials, there's sort of two things we can say about them. Is that they're optional, we can suppress them, right? And we can also move them around, right? Okay, first of all. And the idea is, you're familiar with the kind of information they give. They all give information about the verb. So even though they don't really directly depend on the verb, they give information about the verb, right? So here, notice on Wednesday is what we call a time adverbial. It's saying when we drank the milk, right? So once again, it should be obvious that the relevance of this, this adverbial will be it always pertains to the verb drink, right? That is what we call the scope. En français, on parle de la portée du complément circonstanciel. On parle de la portée du complément circonstanciel parce que ça porte sur le verbe, d'accord? Donc on peut dire avec chacun de ces compléments circonstanciels, on Wednesday, very slowly, et because he wanted to, que chacun d'eux porte sur le verbe. Et il donne des informations différentes, mais n'empêche que chacun, on peut dire à sa manière, porte sur le verbe, quelle que soit sa position dans la phrase. Donc la première, on Wednesday, il s'agit d'un complément circonstanciel de temps. Le deuxième, very slowly, il s'agit d'un complément circonstanciel de manière, c'est la manière dont la personne boit le lait. Et la dernière, because he wanted to, là il s'agit d'un complément circonstanciel de cause, c'est la raison pour laquelle la personne. Et donc, et donc, donc là, on a fait ici euh, le tour de. Enfin, l'idée c'est que les principes, on peut dire généraux, des compléments circonstanciels. Le fait qu'ils portent sur. Déjà, ils portent sur le verbe, mais ils peuvent être supprimés et ils peuvent être déplacés. Donc, that's a sort of essential thing to understand. Um, and once again, and they are not direct objects, indirect objects, subject complements, and so on. Okay? So so now what we're going to do is we're going to continue. By the way, I should tell you this document is sort of a revised version of a document that I've already given you. I've added one element, so you will find this document on this Moodle the Moodle page, I should say, for this week. So this is you will find this. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at, if you prefer, the various structures of these adverbials. So these if we look at the three examples that we've already seen, right? We have our, on Wednesday is the first adverbial. Our second adverbial is very slowly, and our third adverbial is because he wanted to. So you might look at these adverbials and you might say to yourself, well, these are kind of different animals. On Wednesday is not constructed the same way that very slowly is constructed, which is of course even more differently constructed than because he wanted to. So that's because all of these different adverbials, although they have the same function, right? And we've talked about the function. The function is to give information about the event drink, right? Okay. So even though they all have the same function, right? And by the way, that function is what we're going to say. We're just going to say it's an adverbial function. So that's something I really want you to keep in your brain. And it's difficult because, to be honest, it's probably not the best designation that we can have for this kind of thing. Adverbial always refers to function. So I could say that about 5 times. Adverbial always refers to function. Adverbial never refers to the structure. Okay, adverbial refers to what this group of words does, right? It doesn't refer to what the group of words is. So function is the role that these group of words perform in the sentence, right? Okay, so we have our 3 different groups of words, right? Okay, but they all have the same role, right? The scope of each of one of them, as we say, la portée de chaque complément circonstanciel, ça porte toujours sur le verbe, et en tant que tel, il s'agit toujours d'un complément circonstanciel, d'accord? Donc, et du coup, ça c'est la fonction, ou si vous voulez, le rôle de chacun des compléments circonstanciels. So now we have our 3. So hopefully you can understand it. So, in analyzing, let's say, a subject, it's important that you're going to want to identify adverbials, and just keep in mind that, it's always good to dissociate structure and function. Every time that you say adverbial, you write adverbial, you think adverbial, it's always going to be a function. It will never be the structure, right? So what we're going to look at now are the different. So notice, and it's always the same function. And so we have our. So that is sort of a constant, right? And that is the theme of today's class. We're only looking at this adverbial function. But so the thing that's going to be different, of course, are the kinds of structures, and they are listed here, right? And as you can see, that is stated in the document. Different types of structures can fulfill this function. The primary ones are as follows, and here we have the 7 adverbial structures, right? So I'm by the way, of course, I'm sort of repeating what is stated in this section that you're going to read, right? So here you can think of this being a list of structures, right? So and we can kind of just go through them, right? Now I'm kind of go back to our original statement. Okay, we're gonna sort of edit our section here. Okay, so here we have. Here, obviously, the words in italics are the adverbials that we're talking about. So here, the first one is going to be the adverb phrase, and right away you might think that this way of naming things is a little bit confusing, and I must admit it is true. Um, um, we have very slowly, right? And what we're going to do now is kind of extend the structures that we have already learned, right? Um, so we look at this group of words very slowly, and try to keep in mind that you don't want to forget the method that we've already learned. When we look at structure, right? If you remember, we can kind of cover up this he drank the milk. This doesn't exist, he drank the milk. We're only looking at very slowly, right? Because when we talk about function, of course, we're saying, what do these words do? We say, these words modify drink. That means we have an adverbial function. So these are complementary notions, right? Structure and function. So when we're going to ask ourselves what the structure of these words is, it's very important to sort of, you can put blinders on. C'est comme si vous êtes un cheval et vous mettez les œillères et vous ne regardez pas ailleurs. Ça, c'est la discipline qu'il faut. Vous dites, ok, il s'agit de déterminer la structure de ce groupe de mots. Ça veut dire que vous ne vous posez même pas la question à savoir ce que font ce groupe, ces mots. Vous vous dites comment ces mots sont articulés. Quelle est l'organisation interne de ces mots? So that's what we're going to ask. So we're just going to look at very slowly. We say, what kind of an animal is this? So we first look at slow, right? And this is actually, so we can look at very and slowly, right? And what we see here, I'm going to try to do this as best. We'll see if this works. Right? So I can go below. And we're actually we're going to see a structure that looks a lot on the surface a lot like the structure of a noun phrase or an adjective phrase, because we're going to have a head and a pre-modifier. So in an adverb phrase, we have a head, which is going to be an adverb, right? Slowly is an adverb, and just as a reminder, you're probably well aware of the fact that here we have a process of what we call derivation. So it might be more easy for you to sort of realize that slow is an adjective, right? Slow typically would be a pre-modifier in a noun phrase, and it would modify a noun. For example, I could say, this is a slow movie, right? Okay. Slow is a pre-modifier modifying movie, right? Okay. So here we have what the process of derivation, right? So we have slow, right? And then we add our suffix li, and adding suffixes very often makes us change a grammatical category, right? Slow is an adjective, and we add our typical ly suffix, right? And that makes us that transforms the adjective slow into the adverb slowly. Okay. And so that's very often what happens with the ly suffix. Now be aware, sometimes a word might end in ly without and this doesn't necessarily mean that we're dealing with this adverbial ly suffix. You can kind of morphologically determine this by sort of get rid of the ly and determining yourself if what remains, in this case slow, is an adjective. So that's just to sort of give you an idea that here we have an adverb, right? And it gives information about, adverbial type of information about, how, when, where, what they call les compléments circonstanciels de temps. So here we have an adverb, and we have a pre-modifier, which is very. This is going to be very. Is going to be a pre-modifier. It's going to be a head. So I'll just write. Maybe we're going to put our head. We notice it's always a good idea to start with the head, right? And we're going to have our pre-modifier. And so don't be thrown off by the fact that there is a surface resemblance, right, between the structure of a noun phrase and an adverb phrase, right? Because you might say, I've seen this before. We've seen structures with pre-modifiers, heads, and by the way, we could have an optional post-modifier. They're very rare in adverb phrases. It would be something like indeed, right? He drank the milk very slowly indeed. We could even do that. I'm sorry, I'm writing pre-post mod. Okay, so we're adding our post. So let's for the for the fun of it, let's add a post modifier. And this post modifier, it's going to be indeed. I hope this is clear. I think it's actually clearer this way because you can kind of see things. So whoops, we're going to kind of nudge our head adverb into place, and now we are going to sorry. Okay, so hopefully this way of organizing things puts things kind of where they should be. You can say, all right, we're making the modification. Okay, let's hope it's clear. So here we have slowly is our head adverb, right? Okay, very is our pre-modifier. It just as sort of to make you more familiar with these things. Very often when we have a pre-modifier in an adverb phrase, it's going to be another adverb. By the way, you've probably heard the fact that we say, what are adverbs? You say, what do adverbs modify? Adverbs modify verbs, just like slowly. The whole adverb phrase very slowly indeed modifies drank. They can modify adjectives. I could say this is a he's very nice, right? Nice is an adjective, or other adverbs very slowly, right? And often this kind of a pre-modifier adverb is what we're going to call sort of an intensifier, right? We're in sort of intensifying the slowness of the way that this person drinking. So, and then it's very rare to have a post modifier. I can only think of hardly any examples, but indeed is the only one I can really think of. But there are very few possibilities, but it exists, right? So anyway, obviously I'm not going to. By the way, I'm not at all going to ask you to. Obviously, we're not going to have very many. Your assignments are going to be more writing assignments, but I kind of want to make sure that we're kind of square with this. The fact that we have a thing called a here we have the structure. In this sentence, the structure is going to be an adverb phrase, and the function is going to be adverbial. So that might be a little confusing, that terminology, right? And by the way, this is in some other linguists will call adverbials. They might call these subjuncts or adjuncts. You might see these in your travels. You might other teachers here in Paris 8, they might call adverbials disjuncts, conjuncts, adjuncts. Now I decided to sort of stick with this. I'm using sort of the more traditional vocabulary. I typically like to stick with the traditional vocabulary, and if you sort of want to go farther, you'll find this. But if you read, for example, a grammar book by Huddleston, he's going to refer to these as differently. He's going to refer to these as conjuncts or adjuncts, more likely adjuncts. But don't get too carried away with that. But the reason they do this is because they think it's a little bit misleading to define a function adverbial in terms of the structure. Because the reason we say adverbial is what we're saying. This is typically what adverbs do. What adverbs do? They modify verbs, right? Adjectives and other adverbs, and it's that first function, right? Typically the role of an adverb is going to be to modify the verb, right? So that means all of these things, right? This prepositional phrase here, the noun phrase, all of these things, as we've seen, they're modifying the verb, so people can say, oh, that's an adverbial thing to do, so we're going to call that function adverbial. Adverb, we're modifying the verb. So as it sort of seems like a redundancy, typically adverb phrases, their function will be to modify, typically, right? That is their predominant, defining, I would say prototypical function would be to modify the verb, and that's what they're doing here. Okay, so now let's look at another structure, and we've seen this structure before, right? Okay, this is our in the afternoon. This is our. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we've already spent some time on this. We've reviewed this. You're aware of the fact that in the afternoon is a prepositional phrase, right? Okay, so as a review, that means that it's a different structure, right? We have in is the head preposition, right? The afternoon is the complement of the preposition, right? So in the afternoon, the structure will be a prepositional phrase, right? Okay, that's the structure, and the function of that will be to say when these people left, right? So that is an adverbial function. Function is adverbial, right? By the way, if you say that it's a time adverbial or a place adverbial, right? De lieu, de temps, de manière, that's sort of extra information. I'm not going to ask you this information, but that's sort of the general category is, we're saying it gives information about the event, right? And it could be temporal information, spatial information, that kind of thing. Temps, espace, manière. So here we're going to have um, in the information is going to be a prepositional phrase, and that's going to give information about when the people left and so on. So notice once again we can suppress this. We can just have our sentence. We can cross this out. They left, right? We could actually move this around. In the afternoon, they left. So once again, the structure of in the afternoon is a prepositional phrase, and the function is going to be once again adverbial. All of these functions are going to be adverbial. That should be no surprise. Okay. Another one can be, and surprisingly, only really for time adverbials. Now we're moving on to. Well, it's our third one. We have two. Like I might just erase this because it's getting our number. It's making our numbers be mixed up. Okay. So now we're moving on to our third one. And this order. I mean, I've chosen this order, but this is not. This isn't necessarily the order that they appear for everyone. So now we're moving on to our noun phrase, right? And here we have it might be surprising that noun phrases that can be they can be adverbial, but in certain, and it only really happens, to be honest, for time adverbials. If I can say Friday he went somewhere. Friday is a noun phrase, right? Or I could say this Friday or last Friday, right? Last Friday is a noun phrase. This Friday is a noun phrase. So here, this week is a noun phrase. So the week is the head noun. This is the determiner. Together, they are a noun phrase, and the function is saying when these people are discussing. So that is the scope of this noun phrase. It is giving information about discussing, right? So that means in this case, this week structure is a noun phrase and the function adverbial. Okay, so just be aware of the fact that can happen. Now we're looking at our verb ing clause, right? Now we've already seen verb ing clauses, right? Now you might be thinking, wait a second. Some of these structures, we've seen some of these structures before, and they often have other functions, right? As we've seen, the whole point of sort of nominal clauses are usually a noun phrase will be something like a subject or a direct object, but the idea is that noun phrases can also be adverbial. Okay. Likewise, we looked at verb ing clauses when we looked at nominal clauses, right? We've said, for example, if I say I like, maybe I'll write it down here. Write another sentence. An example. If I say I like these people, and then I say I like I don't know, I like sleeping late. Okay, so here let's underline. We're gonna make this in italics, and we're gonna have sleeping late in italics too. So hopefully you can appreciate I like these people. It's obvious that this noun phrase is a direct object, right? And here we can see that sleeping late, right, is also a direct object, and it is a verb ing clause. So we've seen this before, right? So the structure, so once again, the structure here, noun phrase, function of these people, right? These people, structure, noun phrase, function, direct object. Here, sleeping late, structure is going to be verb ing clause, function, direct object, right? So that, what does that do? That means that this is what we call a nominal clause, right? It is a verbal structure, verb ing clause, right? And it has a nominal function, namely direct object. But so here we have the structure of thinking over a problem. Once again, is our verb ing clause, right? It is the verb thinking with its complements over the problem, right? So taken together, thinking over the problem is going to be our verb ing clause. Once again, structure. It is a verb and its complements. But here the function is not going to be something like a direct object or something like that. It is going to give information about this person staring into the garden. It's gonna give information about staring. Now it's a little bit. Okay, so it's a little bit. It might be a little bit. I'm trying to think. Difficult to determine exactly, and sometimes there is ambiguity, exactly what kind of adverbial it is, but you don't need to know that information. You might think, is this? You could say, is this a cause adverbial? Is this saying why this person stared? It sometimes in certain cases it might be more of a cause adverbial, or you might think this being just, we could call this a time adverbial, saying sort of when the person is staring. So that might lead to confusion, and you might think of this being describing her, but it's actually saying under what conditions this person is staring. So I would say the scope of this verb ing clause is going to be the event staring, right? So that means we are dealing with an adverbial, right? So here the structure of this verb ing clause, thinking over the problem, is going to be a verb ing clause, and the function will be adverbial. And very often we find these adverbials sort of in a sort of a leading position in the sentence, and this is this happens really in a lot. This is sort of a rhetorical device almost in a lot of French writing. Regardons par la fenêtre, elle a fait telle chose. Okay. So now the next one. Notice we've seen these in pairs before, right? We said that two sort of competing non-phonic clauses, because thinking is this is a non-conjugated verb, right? Just like to here we have the infinitive. To inform is a non-conjugated verb. Here we have verb ing clauses and infinitive clauses are sort of two competing structures, right? Okay. So in this case we have to inform you of my absence, right, is the structure of that is going to be an infinitive clause. Hopefully you're familiar with that. So here you were looking at this and you think, ooh, wait a second, this might be confusing. We might think that to inform you of my absence is a direct object, right? But this is not what I am writing. What I'm writing is not to inform. That is not the complement. It is not the direct object complement of that verb. Instead, this can be confusing when we have, that's why I'm giving this example, when we have infinitive clauses that immediately follow verbs, and this is an intransitive verb, right? Okay. Here we have a subject. I'm writing with a verb, and that's all, right? We have a subject and a verb followed by an adverbial. So that means we have the intransitive pattern, right? Followed by, because we could suppress this. I'm writing, right? And it's important here to note what might help you understand this is very often, almost exclusively, when we have infinitive clauses, right, as adverbials. In this case, they're going to be what we call a goal adverbial. In French, a goal adverbial is un complément circonstanciel de but, l'expression du but. D'accord? Ça dit la raison pour laquelle on écrit dans cet exemple. D'accord? Donc, peut-être garder à l'esprit que très souvent, nous allons rencontrer des propositions infinitives. Donc here we call this an infinitive clause, une proposition infinitive, et le rôle de cette proposition infinitive est l'expression du but dans la phrase, d'accord, qui porte sur le but. Ça donne la raison pour le but de cet événement. Okay, so that's the case, and so be aware of the fact that you might, in other cases, it might be easy to confuse an infinitive clause that's a direct object. For example, if I, in other cases, we can have infinitive clauses that are direct objects. Okay, for example, I want to go, right? I want it. I want to. If I write I want to go and I want to go would be a direct object. Now here and once again, we're going to see the third. Notice we had our four, when we looked at our nominal clauses, we noticed that there were four non-finite clauses, right? And the third one, right, was our verbi en clause, and here is a chosen by the people is our verbi en clause, right? Okay, so it is going to be it's going to function exactly very very much like the verb ing clause, if that helps you out. It's just going to give you information about that sort of accompanies this event, right? So it's sort of it very, once again, even more so than the verb ing clause that is adverbial. Very often verbi en clauses there is a sort of an ambiguity between the function being, it's always going to be adverbial, but it's not always clear if we're going to be talking about a cause, like a parce que. We could say in a sense choisi par le peuple. Et on peut il y a des potentielles divergences quant à savoir si choisi par le peuple donne la cause pour laquelle, ici il me semble le cas, ou si c'est juste de l'information qui accompagne le processus. Ça serait, on va dire que c'est parfois ça peut être de temps ou de lieu. But that's, I'm never going to ask you to do that. That's not really the goal of this class, but it's kind of going to help you sort of understand the difficulty. You might sort of feel ill at ease with these type of adverbials because it isn't really obvious that there's sort of like that it's like a time adverbial or a goal adverbial. There is I would say potential ambiguity, but it's not a problem in any way. And so in this case, we have our chosen by the people, right? The structure is going to be a verb en clause because it is our verb choose in the en form followed by its complements. So that means chosen by the people will be a verb en clause, right? And the scope will be the going on, right? Okay, it's talk. It's referring to that event, even though it might seem like it's only referring to the subject, right? So that means it's an adverbial. Okay. Now, and lastly, we have sort of a general, sort of a wider category. And we're going to be very kind of loose in our denomination of this category. And it is what we're going to have when we have, here, notice here we have a subordinator, right? Okay. And if remember, we said that when we looked at that clauses, we said that that was a subordinator because how we define subordinators are going to be, they're going to be words that we add to groups of words that would otherwise be sentences, right? For example, so if we look at the group of words, they were so inclined, that is a perfect sentence, right? Okay. But once we add because to it, right, it becomes subordinated, right? So that means that we have basically what we're just going to call this loosely a subordinate clause. Now, unfortunately, um, we don't really have the best. We're not very good at naming this. I have to be honest. That's one of the shortcomings of grammar, is that I think we're going to name this in a very loose way. We're just going to call this a subordinate clause, right? En français, on va dire que c'est une subordonnée en because, right? Okay, and so you can see how and there are other there are. I think that maybe I'll give you other examples of words that I could write instead of because. We could say because, while, as, after, before. Okay, there's a lot of different words, and these are words like we could all replace for because, and all of these, and this would be like. Think about. Notice this is a little bit difficult because in French you're always going to have like the presence of the subordinating conjunction que. So you're going to say parce que, tandis que, ou pendant que. That would be while. Tandis que, pendant que. That would be as would be sort of like comme. So it's a little bit clearer. So after would be après que. Before. Notice after. So you see, you're lucky in French. It's easier to distinguish between prepositions and conjunctions because you have après la préposition, après la course, oui. But if you say après que, la présence de que désigne qui, en fait, ça va être beaucoup plus clair qu'il s'agit d'une conjonction et non pas une préposition. Okay, so here we have so I'm just giving you examples of types of subordinators, right? It's kind of good to have a few examples in your head, and I can say, oh, they went sailing because they were so inclined, while they were so inclined, as they were so inclined, after they were so inclined, before they were so these are words that subordinate the following words, right? Or the following, you could say, proposition, which would have been a sentence. They were so inclined, and it makes this word's a subordinate clause. So we're just going to call that a subordinate clause. And very often they can give different kinds of information. They can be they can be goal adverbials. They can be cause adverbials. They can be time adverbials. They can be place adverbials. And so on. So this is kind of difficult because here we have sort of you might be, the potential difficulty is that because we have a subordinate clause and because we can subordinate something that could have been a sentence, very often we can have a very, very long, a sort of an endless subordinate clause with perhaps another subordinate clause in it. Hopefully you can appreciate that. We may have something like this, right? We can have something of this nature and only attached to something. Here, by the way, we have they went sailing, which is just going to be here we have a subject and the verb, attached to a very simple verb structure. So, and we can have a lot of subordinate clauses that are adverbials, and they can be long, right? Because all we need to do is have our subordinator, our subordinator, which is subordinating conjunction, right? And they can introduce, a lot of words, and we can have many of them, right? So I would say this is sort of it, to be familiar with this kind of thing and say, oh, I see what this sentence isn't so hard. We just have a simple sentence with three adverbials that are subordinate clauses. I could say they went sailing because they were so inclined to do so, while they were talking to their friends, um, as we have discussed, right? We can add, and so that's a sentence with three, right? Three separate adverbials, which that's the function adverbial, and the structure is going to be subordinate clauses. So that's the end of this lesson. I hope this format. Maybe you feel free to give me feedback whether you prefer this format. I think it works better because it's sort of clear where we're going. I have this sort of cursor that I can move around, and I can type things. I think we'll kind of stick with this till the end, and we will actually do class in a similar way when we have our next week. I think it will be a big blue button class because I can upload documents and we can kind of play with documents together. You'll be answering things about them in the little dialogue box there. You'll be giving smiley faces and stuff like that. So excellent. So thank you very much. I will next week. I will be giving you information about your assignment for next week. I'm sorry, for 2 weeks. As I said, the assignment will be for the ninth week, and we will be it will be a straightforward writing assignment. Great, thanks very much.